where I'm going to start is by talking about workplace anxiety. And it's so important to talk about it today because what the data shows is that anxiety levels and stress levels are at their highest level since we started measuring reliably. And that's decades and decades. Yeah, they probably were higher during World War II. But over the past 50 years, we had never measured anything like this. They were extremely high pre-COVID. They're even higher now. And the trends are not looking good. And there's a great deal of concern, rightfully, about these rising levels of anxiety. It's concerned by managers who are reporting subpar performance as a result of anxiety. It's a concern of the World Health Organization talking about a stress pandemic, talking about how anxiety and stress are the silent killers. It's a concern in schools where we're seeing younger and younger kids struggling with anxiety. We're seeing suicide levels that are attributed to anxiety. So wherever you look, whether it's in workplace, schools, community, whether it's in the US, China, Kenya, everywhere in between, levels of anxiety are on the rise. And the question is, what do we do about it? Well, my colleagues and I have been studying stress and anxiety for decades now. And what we found initially surprised us. In retrospect, in hindsight, our findings are pretty obvious, but a lot of things in hindsight are pretty obvious. What we found was that actually stress and anxiety that everyone is so concerned about, that's actually not the problem. At least it's not the real problem. That in fact, stress and anxiety potentially are good for us. Now, let me explain this. So I'll explain it through an analogy. And the analogy is from the physical world, and it holds true in the psychological world as well. So in the physical world, you go into the gym and you lift weights. What are you doing to your muscles? You're stressing them. Now, is this a bad thing? Of course not, because you go to the gym once, and then 2 days after you go to the gym again, and 2 days afterwards you go to the gym and you lift weights. And over time, a month, 6 months later, you actually, as a result of the stress that you're putting on your muscles, you grow stronger, bigger, healthier, better off. So stress is not a problem. It's potentially good for us. When do the problems begin? The problems begin when you go to the gym and you lift weights, and a minute later, you lift the same weights, and a minute after that, you lift even more and more. And then the following day, you don't wait a day. The following day, you go back to the gym and you lift weights again and again. And that's when the problems begin. The problems begin because you get injured, because you get weaker rather than stronger. The problem, therefore, is not the stress, potentially good for us. The problem, rather, is the absence of, the lack of recovery. Whether it's in the gym, physically, or in life, psychologically. You see, what we found is that healthy, happy, successful people, they experience stress just like everyone else does. And what they do differently from most people is that they punctuate their crazy, busy lives with periods of recovery, with what I call islands of sanity. And these periods of recovery are what allows the stress, whether it's physical or psychological, to actually help us grow, develop, become stronger, better, healthier. It's not the stress that's the problem. It's the absence of recovery, the lack of recovery in the gym and in life. You see it in workplace. There are many people who work hard, whether it's managers, whether it's line employees. Some of them are flourishing, thriving. Others are experiencing breakdown, meltdown. What's the difference between those who are flourishing and those who experience meltdown? Not the stress. They all experience stress. Part of the human condition is that the flourishing group also introduces periods of recovery. Now, what does that recovery look like? Well, there are many shapes and forms to recovery. For instance, let me talk a little bit about micro-level recovery, short periods of recovery. That's about taking a 15-minute break every 2 hours or so. The break could be going for a walk. It could be listening to music. It could be having a meal with colleagues or your friends, but not a meal when you're on the phone and doing work at the same time. That's not recovery. That's simply more stress. Or it's about exercising. There's a lot of research showing the benefits of physical exercise, that 30 minutes 3 times a week of physical exercise has the same effect on our psychological well-being as our most powerful psychiatric medication. In fact, it works in the same way. It releases norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine. These are the feel-good chemicals in the brain. That's through exercise as a form of recovery. At any age, whether you're talking about kids, whether you're talking the workplace, whether you're talking about the elderly. Another form of micro-level recovery in the workplace was introduced by one of my colleagues. Just before COVID, I think it was 2018, maybe 2017, he was invited by a New York trading firm to come in and speak to the employees. And the reason why they invited him, this trading firm, was because they were really struggling with anxiety, with stress. People were leaving the workplace, underperforming, getting sick, all the symptoms that we associate with stress. So he comes in and gives a lecture very similar to what I just talked to you about now. Stress is not the problem is lack of recovery. They come in, they come to him after the lecture and say to him, "Doctor, we loved what you had to say. Tell us, what do we do? Prescriptions." He said, "Okay, here is what I'd like you to do. What I'd like you to do is every 2 hours, take a 15-minute break for a cup of coffee or meditation or exercise or a meal, whatever." And they said, "You're kidding. We don't have 15 minutes. You know what can happen on the world markets in 15 minutes? We have to be on that screen all the time." He said to them, "Wow, how about 5 minutes then?" They said, "No, we have our meals in front of that screen." He said, wow, he thinks for a few seconds and says, "Okay, so how about 30 seconds? They think for a few seconds and then they say, 30 seconds we'll give you. What have you got? Quickly. And then he says, "Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. What I'd like you to do is every 2 hours, pause for 30 seconds. During those 30 seconds, I want you to take 3 deep breaths. Ideally with your eyes closed, but you don't have to. So 5 to 6 seconds in, all the way down to your belly, if you can through your nose, and then 5 to 6 seconds out. In, out, 3 deep breaths. If you really want to go wild," he said, "you can take 4 deep breaths, but 3, good enough." And they said, "We'll do it." And he said, "But I don't want you to just do it today and tomorrow because you remember that I was here. I want you to do it consistently, day in and day out." And they did. They created reminders around the office, whether it was on the wall, the word breath, or on a screensaver, or their smartphone reminded them every 2 hours, or they wore a bracelet to remind them. And they did it. After 1 month, the organization looked, felt, and performed at a whole different level. Why? Because stress is not, never was, the problem. The problem rather is the lack of recovery. And as soon as they introduced that form of recovery, that changed everything. The stress helped them rather than detracted from them. So that these are some examples. Again, the exercise, the breathing, the meal, the meditation. These are all examples of micro reminders. Sorry, recovery. Now there's also recovery on the mid-level. Getting a good night's sleep is important. Taking a day off is important. Or the macro level recovery, which is a vacation. And not a vacation when you're taking your work with you. Real vacation, real recovery. And just like a racing car can't go around the track again and again and again without a pit stop, you know, the tires will blow up, you'll run out of fuel. So a human being, no matter how good and how fast you are, you need those recoveries so that you can turn that stress into growth. Now, unfortunately, most people fail, which is why most people in the workplace today, especially post-COVID, are struggling with stress, with breakdown, with meltdown, with burnout. Not because of the stress, misinformed, misguided, mislabeled culprit. It's rather the lack of recovery that's the problem. And we need to do it consistently. So this is one thing that I wanted to say about workplace recovery, but I have another thing which is very important. And I want to draw here on the wonderful work by Kelly McGonigal, who teaches at Stanford. And she talks about a study, a fascinating study that was conducted at the beginning of the 21st century. So here is what the study shows. They wanted to study stress and stressful people. And they studied all the stressful people whom they could find, and they compared those stressful people to the regular population who weren't as stressed as they were. And what they found was everything that they expected to find, meaning the stressful people were less healthy, actually more likely to die or contract chronic diseases, psychologically were less happy, performed less well. All the characteristics we attribute to stress. But then, when they studied this group in greater depth, those stress people, they found that within the big population of stress people, there was a subpopulation who were as stressed as everyone else was. But this subgroup actually performed better than the rest of the stressed people, were healthier than the rest of the stressed people, lived longer than the rest of the stressed people. Not only that, that subgroup that I talked about in the middle of this larger population were also performing better, happier, and healthier than the general population. Now, how is that? Not only that, as I mentioned, they lived longer than the healthier, regular or non-stressed population. And when they studied them deeper, further, what they realized, what was the difference between the small group of stressed people and the larger group? It was mindset, it was perception, specifically that inner group. Remember, it was healthier, happier, more successful, lived longer, not just than the other stressed people, than everyone else. They had a different perception of stress. They didn't see stress as problematic. They didn't see stress as an issue. They actually realized, hey, stress is, part of life, may not always be pleasant, but potentially it's good for us. Not a bad thing. In other words, they had a more positive understanding of, perception of stress. Now listen to this statistic. In the United States, they ran this study over 8 years, those researchers. Their estimate is that during those 8 years, 182,000 people died who would not have died had they had a different perception of stress. So when we're talking about a change of perception, we're not just talking about, oh, that's nice, cute, maybe I'll be a little bit more successful. You actually live longer as a result of a different perception of stress. So if you see stress as harmful, as bad for you, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, it turns out. Whereas if you see stress as potentially good, natural, maybe even healthy, because I can grow stronger. That in and of itself, just that change in mindset, in perception, will lead to healthier, happier, better, longer living. Look at the impact of perception. Now, Elia Crum, who today also teaches at Stanford, did research showing that you can change that perception in minutes. What she did specifically, she went into an organization that was experiencing a lot of stress. One group of people, business as usual, they just continued with their work. The second group, she showed them a 15-minute video. Mild intervention, doesn't hurt. In the video, she simply told them that stress potentially is good for you and explained to them why, that it can actually get you to be more resilient, it gets you stronger, that it can lead to deeper engagement, that it can motivate and focus you sometimes. In other words, they change their perception of stress based on that 15-minute video. As a result of that video, compared to the other group that just continued business as usual, those for whom stress was enhancing rather than bad, their experience of work improved and their performance improved. And if we copy-paste the previous study that I mentioned, they were also healthier and would live longer. Just by change of perception. So what I'm talking about here when it comes to workplace stress are three main points. First of all, misdiagnosing the problem. Second, introduce recovery into your life. Third, change your perception. And if you do that, it's not that stressful experiences will become fun. They're by definition stressful. However, they will not last as long, and they will lead to growth rather than deterioration. They will lead to more health rather than more illness. They will lead to better performance rather than subpar performance. As a result of change of mind and introduction of different new behaviors.